Well, ladies and gentlemen, there is brazen Hindumisia on display in the United Kingdom, where there have been attacks on Hindus in Leicester, in Smethwick and also in Birmingham. And now we've just got a letter that's been written by the Vishwa Hindu Parishad to Prime Minister Liz Truss. The Vishwa Hindu Parishad World Hindu Council deeply concerned and alarmed at the ongoing violence in Leicester, in which large number of Hindus of Leicester, their places of worship, their cultural and religious symbols have been wantonly targeted and damaged by Islamic extremists and hoodlums. These violent, hateful and extremist acts are entirely unidirectional and unilateral. However, a strong but false narrative is being construed that it is Hindus of that area who triggered this wanton violence and are responsible for the same. Here are some incontrovertible facts. Several Hindus have been assaulted. Some of them have been admitted to the hospital. Numerous Hindu places of worship in Leicester have been violated and desecrated. In fact, just today, violent protests have been held near a very prominent Hindu religious and cultural center in Smethwick in Birmingham. Hindus are being terrorized to remove symbols of their heritage, traditions, culture and religion, and a few Leicester Hindus had, out of fear to comply. Many houses and properties of Hindus have been damaged. Many Hindus living in impacted area have not sent their kids to school for several days now. Nothing of this sort has happened to Muslims, Islamic symbols or places of worship. Hindus by nature are a peaceful and law-abiding people. UK Hindus, who constitute a minuscule 1.5% of UK's population, have contributed significantly to their adopted homeland. Economically, culturally and educationally, very large number of UK Hindus are self-employed and provide jobs to others. As an acknowledgement of our contribution to the United Kingdom, and in the next page, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad is actually quoting Margaret Thatcher there, and they have said that Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher had stated a public event addressing Hindus. You have taught us in this country so much about the family, and we must continually keep it in mind. You're a great asset to the UK. Unfortunately, local police and administration have been lax and irresolute in quelling such violence. Leicester Hindus have been subjected to violence and intimidation continuously since September 4, 2022. We request that strong and immediate effort be made to protect Hindu lives and dignity and properties. We also urge that strong punitive action be taken against all those who are involved in such violent and heinous hate crimes. Sans such strong actions, peace and social fabric of the country will get damaged. Law and order and the due protection of law to all Hindus, particularly in Leicester and Birmingham, must be provided. Finally, we request that the UK government, under your strong leadership, should not view the recent Leicester riots as a one-off event. These riots are a part of a continuum. They arise from the ideology of hate, aggression and violence. These riots are merely the most recent manifestation of Islamic extremism, which has hurt the UK and other countries over the last several decades. Earlier acts include London Metro bombings, and then they have gone out to extol many other aspects. The VHP had requested that Honourable High Commissioner of UK in India for an appointment to convey our concern. We have not received any response till now. Therefore, this letter is sent via email. We shall be happy to meet the High Commissioner to discuss the matter towards a just resolution. And it's signed by Alok Kumar, the Senior Advocate, Central Working President of the VHP. So the VHP writing a strongly worded letter and raising objection. Let's go across to Pandit Satish K. Sharma, Sarah L. Gates and Pattai Suresh Krishnamurthy joining us this evening, even as these attacks continue. Namaste. Thank you very, very much. Sarah ji, one of the aspects, because from Australia to the United Kingdom to America, we've witnessed this, and I've seen it, where there is this concerted effort to once again tell Hindus to stay in line, and we will decide what you are going to do. The Hindu community has been told this repeatedly. Would you agree, disagree that this is manifest even in Australia? Can this be random and sporadic, or do you believe there is an organized design to it? Saraji.
Certainly it's organised and it's well funded. It's a well-oiled machine, and depending on circumstance and opportunity and demographics, we've seen these type of incidents, whether it's psychological, systems abuse, or whether it's physical violence playing out in diaspora all around the world. And clearly there's a universal ideology and agenda behind it, and that is to disempower Hindus, to, I guess, disenfranchise them of their positions within society and to smear them as terrorists, and finally to have them, I guess, purged from the countries. They've been calling for deportation and criminalising Hindus for crimes that they have nothing to do with, or which are purely fictitious.
But how is this mobilization happening, and who's stitching this narrative? Have you been able to find out who's doing that in Australia?
I know names of people who are acting, but do I know who's funding them? Do I know who they work for in other contexts? These types of things I have to leave to ASIO. I have reported what I do know to ASIO, just as I did when I came across information that was very important for intelligence in the UK during the course of these attacks. So I will continue to feed information to security and put pressure on them to investigate.
How was that person allowed, Pandit Satish Sharma ji, to get on top of the temple and bring down the flag at the Shivalaya there? How are these people allowed to throw bottles and also firecrackers into the Durga temple in Smethik? And who are these people to decide who can come, Pandit ji, who can come into the UK, who can speak to people and who cannot? Isn't it the job of the British government?
We have civil rights, we have freedoms, supposedly, and they're protected under law. It's an obligation on the police to ensure that every British citizen can go about their lawful business without harassment, without intimidation, and certainly without this sort of aggressive hate. This is hate that we're seeing here. I'd just like to draw your attention to, there was an incident, a Muhammad Khan approached Her Majesty's coffin when it was lying in state, and immediately he was arrested. And he was arrested under Section 4A of the Public Order Act. And this says that a person can be arrested for behavior intending to cause alarm, harassment, or distress. Clearly, all of the activities that we have seen on our screens and recorded, they fall within the scope of that particular piece of legislation, and yet not once has it been used. You know, I am inclined to ask the question that does peace and tranquility, Her Majesty's peace, as it's called in legal speak, does that not extend to Hindus? You know, in Durga Bhavan, we had the elderly, we had women and children, and yet they were being clearly harassed, they were being clearly targeted, and yet no arrests were taking place. Now, I do know that an awful lot of arrests happened overnight. Last night, a great number of arrests were conducted. I know that the individual who was responsible for sending out multiple inciting dog whistle calls to hatred to people to assemble and attack Hindus, he's been arrested and is now being interrogated. But this is all after the event. And what Sarahji said and what you have said, it needs to be borne in mind that after a period of harassment, we self-censor. I've spent the last 2 days, I was in Leicester only a few hours ago, and there is a very somber atmosphere there. Normally before Navratri, there is celebration. There are lights, people are decking their shops, people are excited, there's a buzz, and there's none of it whatsoever. So it is a direct attack on the quality of life of Hindus as Hindus and an attack on their religious places. The obligation on the security services is to ensure that this doesn't happen.
And Sureshji, the thread, the video that was released and that person who did the masked man in Birmingham, he repeated the exact same words that were repeated to try and block Sadhvi Ritumbra's lectures in the US.
So, yes, of course. You know, there's a continuum to this. There's a connection between, there seems to be a connection between what is happening in Leicester and what seems to be happening in the United States. And the timing may be coincidental, but, you know, do we believe it? That's a different story. There's a group calling itself the TNEC Democratic Municipal Committee, which under the influence, open influence of the Indian American Muslim Council in the United States, has called for, among other things, an FBI and a CIA investigation into precisely the organizations we're talking about here, VHPA, into Seva organizations such as Seva International, which, by the way, has been commended by several mayors of several US cities for the fantastic work they did in public service during the COVID pandemic here in the United States. They have targeted the Infinity Foundation. They have targeted the Hindu American Foundation. So this is not an isolated incident. This seems to be more of a global nexus. And clearly, at least we know one organization that is publicly behind this, at least in the United States, and that's the Indian American Muslim Council. And they have literally declared that all of these organizations, the Hindu Students Council, the VHPA, Infinity Foundation are all somehow, handmaidens of the RSS and therefore terrorist organizations. But this is the language that Pandit Sharmaji was referring to, which is this demonization. I think this demonization of anybody who speaks positively about Hinduism and Hindu practices as automatically some kind of a Hindu nationalist fascist person that should not be listened to and should be denied their basic rights. It's a pattern. This is not isolated by any means, and people should be well aware of the organizations that are behind this.
But why would establishments or nations allow such elements to spread this kind of vitriol and misinformation, Saraji? Is there any cognizance of outfits like this and efforts like this in Australia? Or do you believe that there needs to be more that needs to be done? How do you counter a narrative spinning like this?
Well, they've got the upper hand, unfortunately, because they're a few steps in front. Hindu organisations are very poorly funded. They're running on volunteers. These other organisations are highly funded. They probably have in the billions just in Australia alone, and they're hiring people to work in all different sectors to lobby and pressure and to disempower and to force people to separate themselves from Hindus all through the political spectrum and the not-for-profit spectrum. I mean, I've taken so many case studies in the past 6 months of Hindus who've been targeted by these groups, and they do work with the Indian American Muslim Council, and yes, they are connected, and that's visible. They're openly connected. So there's not much you can do about propaganda and disinformation unless it does break the law, like Satishji did point out. And they do have strong laws in the UK, and they can actually press charges against persons for incitement, for hate crimes that are intended to cause violence. And there's plenty of evidence of that, even though these people have scrubbed their accounts. Unfortunately, we had a team monitoring them in the background, and we've got all the screenshots, so we'll be forwarding all of that to the police. And you can see quite clearly they wanted to cut them up. They wanted to do what they did to Hindus in Kashmir. They wanted to clean them out. This type of ethnic cleansing, genocidal ideology, and if it's not coming from that spectrum, it's coming from the anti-immigrant spectrum who wants to clean all of them out. So it's a very, very dehumanizing and polarizing type of ideology, which is very dangerous. So what can we do? Well, we have to fight. Each one of us has to raise awareness. We have to bring it to the attention of everybody and be smart, be savvy, collect the information, report it. And when they don't do anything, turn up and protest. If it comes to protest, then we must. If we must force them to take action. We cannot risk our lives. I'm frightened to leave my house. I have Hindus in Australia telling me that they're watching cars driving past their window. Their wives phone them if they're late home from work. They're worried about their children at school. They're afraid that they're going to get murdered.
And Saraji, this is
the fear of people's lives.
This is brazen intimidation, and this is also a continuum. It's happening in the UK. It's also happening in the US. So there is a chain of events, and it's somewhere connected. We'll have a larger conversation on this, but at the moment I have to wind up. Thank you very much for your time. With that, we call it a wrap on this edition of The Right Stand.